Hello everybody and welcome to our channel Frugal Queen in France, where we share money saving tips, our frugal living ideas, our frugal food, our frugal life here in France. And every Wednesday we open our home to you and invite you in for a midweek money chat. If you're here for the very first time, I'm Jane. My husband Mike is behind the camera. We're British, early retirees, debt and mortgage free, living a frugal life here in France. So let's take a look at what we're going to have a chat about today. Now, this week's chat, and a very pertinent one it is too, is all about having an emergency fund. What it is, what it's for, where you're going to keep it, what are you going to use it for, how you can build one if you don't have one, what not to use it for, and how to establish an emergency fund if you're in a difficult situation where you maybe have a low income or that you're already in a situation where you are paying off debts. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's start off by answering the very first question of what is an emergency fund? Now I want to start with this because it's too complicated a question really, because it means different things to different people. And I've asked some people and they think it's just the amount of money you need to pay for your boiler if it goes wrong, and other people it means something a lot more than that. So I'm going to explain it in terms of what it means to me and what that means generally. An emergency fund is the amount of money that you have set aside to live off if you have no money coming in. An emergency fund will cover your rent or mortgage, it'll pay for your food, it'll pay all of your bills, all of your insurances, your transport, your communication, your absolute bare bones budget for an allotted amount of time. That might be 1 month, that might be 2 or 3 months, that might be 12 months. That is obviously up to you. But an emergency fund in its simplest form is the amount of money that you've got set aside to live off if you've got no money coming in. So why do we need an emergency fund? Now you may be in a very privileged position that if you are sick from work, you may get a defined amount of pay, but most people are not in that situation. If they are sick, say sometimes earn nothing or statutory sick pay. And we've seen people, haven't we, with long COVID and they have been unable to pay their bills. That's just an example. But there are many reasons that we could sadly, very sadly may I add, need an emergency fund. I've had close friends have suddenly lost their husband and they have been literally bereft of money. They've had no money. They have been in a desperate circumstance and they've had no money until they sold their house. So that's how desperate it can be. Both Mike and I have been in situations where we have faced redundancy in our lifetime. We've had very short amount of time to find other jobs and literally scrape round to pay all the bills out of redundancy pay. So it can happen to any of us. We know, for example, that trauma can happen to anyone. Don't think that it couldn't happen to you, because it could. And mental health problems can happen to anyone, leaving any of us either incapable of working for a period of time or incapable of working at all. We all need that emergency fund because anything of those things could happen to any of us. The next question is, how much should we have in an emergency fund? Now, if you have no emergency fund at all, it's always best to get together £1,000 to £2,000, euros or dollars. And I know it's a huge amount of money to get together. Now, best case scenario is 3 to 6 months of all of your living expenses in a fund. And as you get older and it's more difficult to get another job if you need to replace a job, or it's more difficult to refill an emergency fund if you have to use that emergency fund, you may wish to have more. But we can't plan for everything. We can plan our best. It's always good to have some money in an emergency fund. Some is better than none at all. It really is. If you can only get 500 in your fund to start, don't touch it, keep saving. If you can only get 1,000 together, keep saving, but just keep building that emergency fund until you reach 3 to 6 months of living expenses. I know it's a difficult thing to say. Well, it's an easy thing to say and a difficult thing to do, but it is always better to have some money in an emergency fund than none. Moving on to my last point, how do you work out exactly how much money you need? Now, if you need to cover all your bills, you work it out like this. How much is your monthly mortgage payment? Or how much is your rent? And then you need to go through each and every essential bill. How much is your tax on your house, your council tax, your gas, your electricity, your water, your insurances, your communication? And don't go thinking that you can do without the internet or a mobile phone or any of those things, because you need those in a modern world. You need those if you're job hunting. You need them if you just need to get hold of a doctor, for example. You need them. I'm looking at my list here. So you need to make sure that all of your minimum debt payments, if you have any, are covered. And you take those figures and you add them up. And if they add up to £750, that's 1 month. You then need to make multiples of that. 2 months, 1,500, and so on. And you need to start working that out of saving up the multiples of that until you reach the optimum, which is the suggested, which is 3 to 6 months, and then keep going. And you might be wondering why I suggest you keep going. If you are still in employment, that is the time in which to save. Because when you are older, you will need a bigger emergency fund. It only takes your partner dying and you having to pay for the most very basic funeral for it to empty your emergency fund. It only takes a car being written off or you having a big medical bill for it to empty that emergency fund. So the more that you can save in it whilst you're younger, whilst you're working, the better it is in the long run. The next big question about an emergency fund is, where do you put it? What do you do with it? Now, every single country in the world will have a savings system where you can put that money in a bank or someplace which has some kind of beneficial tax system to it. But I would actually say to you, do not worry about the tax on it. They tax you on the interest. They tax you on the interest, not the amount of whole that's in there, the interest that is accrued. What you need to worry about is you have got the lump of money that you need to cover all of your bills, as we've said, for your decided amount of time, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months if you wish. But you have got it there, and the important thing is that you have got it somewhere where you are saving it, that you have got access to it. Now, sometimes you can put that in a longer term savings plan where you will get a little bit more in interest. And if you're lucky, you'll never need to use your emergency fund, and you can just leave it there, accruing a little bit more interest. Here in France, we have a savings account called a livret, L-I-V-R-E-T, a livret. It makes a little bit of interest. And then we have a savings fund in something called an assurance fee, which is similar to a British ISA. It makes a little bit more interest. But if I needed to get that money out, I would lose the interest. They wouldn't take anything from my savings. So there's an important part to remember. Your emergency fund is not your investment portfolio. It's not your pension fund. It's not any of those things. It's a fund of money that you have got saved in case of an emergency, in case that you have no money coming in and you need to live off it. So you need it to be in a savings account, of course, but you need it to be where you can get at it. So let's start talking about building an emergency fund. Let's take the first situation. You have got a lot of money and you're already in debt. So you still need to have an emergency fund. Okay, first of all, you must keep going and paying all of the minimum payment of all of your debts. And that's the first part of it. Second part, the really quickest and easiest way of building an emergency fund, and we did this many years ago when we were in debt, is we went through the entire of our house and we sold anything and everything that we didn't need, didn't want, didn't use, didn't like. It went. Absolutely everything went. Next thing we did is we went on a complete no spend, and we went on a no spend for about 2.5 years. 2.5 years if we didn't need it. So if the washing machine broke down, we went round looking for a second-hand one to keep us going. We didn't go and buy a new one. Those are just a few circumstances. So you continue paying the minimum payments, you sell everything you don't need, and you start getting more money in. And it really doesn't matter. The summer season's coming up, UK, and there's all that work in tourism that's coming up. From cleaning holiday cottages to cleaning caravans to working bar work at the weekend, anything and everything that you can do to earn more money. If you're a care worker, sign up with an agency. If you're not signed up with an agency for any work that you can do, see if you can find some evening work, some weekend work. I'll take all that back. If you are working 82 hours a week, which means you're working 12 days a week, 7 days a week, I can cut you some slack. I would say though, if you're working that much and you're still not getting by, you still need to be in the situation where you are looking for more work. And it is very, very hard to get that emergency fund together in the first place. But once you've got it, then you can start to build on it. So further to the previous question, how do you build an emergency fund if you just don't have one? So if you've got regular work coming in, if you're young enough and strong enough to earn more money, do some more work as well, those are all good things. It does mean that you can put your emergency fund together in a short period of time. And yes, it does mean living off a bare bones budget for a few months, 3 months, 6 months, a year. That's not forever. The sooner you get that emergency fund put aside, the sooner you can just chill a bit, relax a bit, and knowing that it is there. But it might mean in that time you don't have a holiday, you don't have any takeaways, you don't buy anything new, you don't go out to eat, you don't go too far in the car, that you keep your bills down as low as possible, that you don't buy each other any gifts, for example. But there are plenty of ways that you could be earning more money, just in the same way as if you were in debt. You can do all of those small side jobs. It doesn't matter what job you do. There's plenty of work out there where they are looking for seasonal workers, or they're looking for people in the gig economy. So there is more work out there. And the sooner you get that emergency fund together and pop it away in a savings account somewhere, the sooner the better. A question that also gets asked is, so what do you do if you have to use your emergency fund? If you've had a genuine emergency, what do? You just stop and you go right back to the very beginning again. You do all those things that you had to do in the very first place to build it up from scratch all over again. You go Spartan, you go bare bones, you stop buying things, you earn as much money as you can, and you build it up again. And for some people, sadly, that could happen more than once. It is a real shame when it does happen. And as I said, I never like to deliver bad news, but that is all you can do. Start again, build it up again. The next question is what you can do to mitigate future financial emergencies. Now, a financial emergency might be that you've taken your car to the garage, it's got such a repair to do that it isn't worth repairing it. They just say to you, you might as well just scrap it. It's beyond economic repair. And then you'd be in a circumstance where you think to yourself, I've got to have a car for work, what am I going to do? Now, is that the time or is that not the time to use an emergency fund? To mitigate that financial emergency, you need, as soon as you buy one car, to start putting money aside for the next one. And that could be 5 years' time. And you decide on a nominal amount of money, you divide that by how many years and how many months, and that's how much you need to put aside each month for that next car. Christmas coming along and birthdays, school uniforms, all of those are not emergencies. If you know it's going to happen and you don't think to yourself, well, all of a sudden it's going to drain my savings, your savings and your emergency funds are different. Your savings that you're going to spend this year are often called, and I've called them, sinking funds. It's making sure that you start to budget for the inevitabilities. Your washing machine will eventually need replacing. The kids will need new school uniform. They will need Christmas and birthday presents. You will need to service, fix the car, replace the car, pay big bills. You will need to deal with things in your house. You may need, and you will need, not may need, you will need to pay for a funeral, yours or your partner's, in the future. These are not emergencies. These are things that are going to happen. And I'm going to put a link below to how we do our budget and how we put our sinking funds together, and take a look at them. They really might help you. So there we go, how to mitigate future financial emergencies. Get asked the question, well, what's the difference between an emergency fund and long-term savings? Okay, an emergency fund is a fund of money that you do not touch. It's like having two pockets, isn't it? Your right pocket and your left pocket. In your right pocket is the money that you do not touch. In your left pocket is the money that you're saving up for things that you know are going to happen. You know Christmas is going to happen, you know school holidays are going to happen, you know school uniform is going to happen, you know the car service is going to happen, you know new tyres for the car is going to happen. And the difficulty is, if you only have one savings pot, is then you start taking money from your emergency fund to pay for things that are not an emergency. Car service, not an emergency. School uniform, not an emergency. Your boiler breaks down and you're going to be freezing cold and you live in Canada and you're going to die without it. That's an emergency. Your car breaking down and you haven't had the money before because you're in the early stages and you've got to get to work. If you don't get to work, you'll be sacked and you won't going to pay any bills. Yeah, that's an emergency. But it's building up that savings fund, and when you get it there, it's like having a separate fund over here in your left pocket for all those things that could happen, car breakdowns. And that is all about establishing sinking funds and lines on your budget of where you're going to save that. I hope that was helpful. Well, everybody, we hope that you found that useful. And I have a question for you, because we love your comments and we read every single one of them. How much would you advise people to put in an emergency fund? Where would you keep an emergency fund? Because it's different for different countries. Please share with me, if you live in New Zealand or South Africa or Australia, what type of savings fund would you use to keep an emergency fund in? Now, if you found this video useful or you liked it, go on, hit that like button. It's really helping us grow the channel. Now, if you're not a subscriber, what's stopping you? Come on and hit that little notification bell as well. On behalf of Mike and I, we've had a great time. Lovely midweek money chat with you. We'll see you again soon. Bye bye.